Thor, Old Norse, RR, is the Norse god of thunder, the sky, and agriculture. He is the son of Odin, chief of the gods, and Odin's consort Jord, earth, and husband of the fertility goddess Sif, who is the mother of his son Modi and daughter Thrud. His other son, Magni, may be from a union with the giantess Jarnsaxa. Thor was the defender of Asgard, realm of the gods, and Midgard, the human realm, and is primarily associated with protection through great feats of arms in slaying giants. The majority of the tales featuring Thor, in fact, put him in conflict with a giant or with his nemesis the Midgard serpent, Jormungand, the huge monster, a monstrous snake who coils and twists itself around the world. Like almost all of the Norse gods, Thor is doomed to die at Ragnarok, the end of the world and twilight of the gods, but falls only after killing the great serpent with his powerful hammer Mjolnir, dying to its poison. His sons Magni and Modi survive Ragnarok along with a small number of other gods and inherit his hammer which they use to restore order. Thor's popularity reached its height during the Viking Age, c. 790–1100, at which time he was considered the greatest rival to Christ when, roughly from the 10th century onwards, Christianity was introduced to Scandinavia. More amulets and charms of Thor's hammer date from the period when Christianity and the Norse religion were in contention than from any other. Christianity finally prevailed and the cult of Thor was gradually replaced by the new religion by the 12th century. Functions. Thor functioned primarily as a protector god, although stories concerning him also explained natural phenomena, thus linking him with the ideological type of myth, one which explains how some aspect of life came to be. He was said to burst forth from his great hall in his chariot, drawn by two male goats, Tengjastr, Tooth Gnasher, and Tangrasnir, Snarl Tooth, who could be killed and eaten by the god and then brought back to life the next day as long as their bones remained unbroken. The roar of thunder was the rumble of Thor's chariot's wheels across the vault of the heavens and, in another story, he is credited with creating tides. For the most part, however, he was invoked for protection and problem-solving. Scholar Preben Mjølngraak Svensson comments that Thor was master of thunder and lightning, storm and rain, fair weather and crops, and the pagans sacrificed to him when threatened by hunger or disease, Sawyer, 203. He had 3 magical items which helped him defend Asgard and Midgard, his hammer Mjolnir, his belt of strength Megingjur, which doubled his strength when he wore it, and his great iron gloves which he needed to wield his hammer. Thor was invoked to seal business contracts and consecrate marriages, for agricultural abundance, for protection during voyages, especially at sea, and for victory in battle, but he seems to have been called upon whenever any need arose. The introduction of Christianity to Scandinavia, at first, did nothing to diminish the importance of Thor in people's lives. The god continued to be invoked throughout the greater part of the Viking Age as evidenced not only by the amulets and charms mentioned above but by engravings, images, statuary, and the stories which continued to be told about him. Attributes and character. In all of these stories, Thor's attributes are his previously mentioned 3 magical items, the hammer Mjolnir, the belt Megingjur, and his iron gloves, out of which Mjolnir is the most characteristic one, as well as this goat-drawn chariot. These items embellish Thor's great strength, which is his main feature, and Thor also has a quick temper and shows impatience for following others' rules. He is never depicted as a subtle or careful deity and prefers direct action over discussion or planning in solving any problem. Thor is completely without guile or the capacity to deceive and so cannot recognize these qualities in others. As a result, he is often tricked by magical spells or shape-shifting entities which cause things to appear other than they are. Contrary to the popular image of Thor in the present day from Marvel comic books and films, he was not the brother of Loki and is never depicted as clean-shaven or blonde-haired except in Chapter 3 of the Prose Edda, composed circa 1220, a mythography of earlier Norse myths reworked by the Icelander Snorri Sturluson into one structured account, written from a Christian context. Elsewhere, and in almost every image, Thor is always shown with long red hair and a great beard, often as not leaping into battle against giants or killing dwarves without pausing to consider alternatives to violence. He is closely associated with water in many of the myths and is depicted rowing out further into the sea than others have gone and also crossing dangerous rivers, both aspects of his role as a protector god who removes boundaries or goes before a believer as a guide. Thor was not just the preferred god of the Viking warrior, however, as his strength and direct response to any given problem were equally appealing across the spectrum of Viking Age social classes. A housewife could call upon Thor for help with domestic challenges just as a farmer, a weaver, or a brewer would with their own difficulties and, as evidenced by his popularity, Thor would help them. Thor therefore became the Norse god of the everyman, the common sense, no-nonsense deity anyone could relate to and everyone could depend on. Myths involving Thor. The stories which feature the god, besides noting his strength and impatience with delays, all emphasize his reliability. Even when Thor is tricked or outsmarted, his past victories and assurance of future triumphs excuse him. He may not win a battle but will eventually win the war. This concept is clearly explained in chapter 44 of the Prose Edda when the storyteller Hai responds to a question about Thor's victories. Even though Hai claims that the stories where Thor does not win are not worth being told, a number of these are among the most famous. One of these has to do with the castle of the giant ᴍᴜᴜ and the 3 tricks played on Thor. Thor frequently traveled with his human servant ᴍᴜᴜ or with Loki, but, on this journey, he was accompanied by both. They encounter a giant named Skrymir in the forest who offers to carry the food bag but ties it so tightly that Thor cannot open it. 3 separate times Thor attacks Skrymir with his hammer while the giant is sleeping but with no effect. Each time Skrymir wakes up and asks if perhaps a leaf or acorn has fallen on his head. After Skrymir leaves them, the 3 arrive at the stronghold of the giant ᴍᴜᴜ who mocks them for being so small and tells them that, if they want to stay, they must compete in contests which show their worth. Loki offers to compete in eating the fastest and is pitted against Logi of ᴍᴜᴜ's court. Loki eats all the meat in the trough but Logi eats the meat, bones, and trough itself, so Logi is declared the winner. Next, ᴍᴜᴜ offers to run a race and, 3 times, loses to his opponent Hugi. When it is Thor's turn, he chooses a drinking contest and ᴍᴜᴜ offers him a large horn. Thor drinks 3 times but cannot empty the horn. ᴍᴜᴜ mocks him and offers him the challenge of lifting a large grey cat off the floor. Thor can only manage to lift it high enough so that one paw is in the air. Once again, ᴍᴜᴜ mocks Thor and says that perhaps he can win at wrestling an old woman, his nurse Ellie. Thor and Ellie grapple through the hall until Thor is finally forced down onto one knee. At this point, ᴍᴜᴜ calls a halt to the contests and allows the 3 to spend the night. The next morning, ᴍᴜᴜ rides out from the castle with Thor and his companions and reveals the truth of the past few days. He first tells them that he was Skrymir in the forest and that he deceived Thor each time Thor struck him. Thor was actually striking at mountains whose tops were now leveled from each blow. Once they were in the castle, the deceit continued as Loki's opponent in the eating contest was actually wildfire which burned up meat, bones, and the wooden trough while ᴍᴜᴜ's opponent in the race had been thought which flies faster than anyone's feet. In the case of Thor's contest, ᴍᴜᴜ explains, the bottom of the drinking horn was in the sea so that, no matter how much Thor drank, he would never have been able to empty it. He did manage to drink so much, however, that the sea level had dropped and Thor had now created tides. The grey cat had actually been the Midgard serpent who encircles the world, and the fact Thor had managed to raise it as high as he had was incredible. Finally, the old woman he had wrestled was old age itself, which no one can defeat, and ᴍᴜᴜ says how everyone was impressed and in awe when Thor was only forced down on one knee. Thor responds to this speech by drawing out his hammer to smash ᴍᴜᴜ's skull, but the giant has vanished and so has his stronghold. Thor and his companions leave the giant's land, but Thor swears vengeance on the Midgard serpent for being able to resist him. Shortly afterwards, he goes fishing with the giant Hymir and catches the serpent, but Hymir, fearful of drowning since Thor's fight with the beast is threatening their boat, cuts the line. The Midgard serpent escapes and Thor, after hurling Hymir overboard, wades into shore.